Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Catholics, Orthodox, Christians, all who seek the truth. Um, this is a little special video. We are a Catholic channel, but we have a lot in common, traditional Catholics, with our truly separated brethren, the Eastern Orthodox or the Oriental Orthodox, because we all have valid hierarchies, valid priests, valid bishops, valid deacons, valid clergy, because we still have valid apostolic succession. Anyways, I found this article quite interesting because I've been kind of um, I am interested in everything traditional rites of the Eastern churches and the Western churches, because they are apostolic in origin and have grown over the centuries by the faith and devotion and the practice of the ancient fathers, the ancient Christians, the ancient monks and nuns and hermits, which actually had the faith compared to what we have today. Um, and You can see on the picture it says Old Rite Practices. This is an old believer or an old ritualist Russian Orthodox church in Pennsylvania. Um, and the and This article is very appropriate, or very gives us a lot of similarities to what would a traditional Catholic church be like. Not exactly the same things, but very similar in ethos, in spirituality, in decorum. Um, in practice, you are entering the temple of God, the house of God, where God Himself dwells. You have to think of that in this way. The church is not some building we go and listen to a sermon and greet each other and hug and clap, and that's it. No, the church is the temple of God. It is the house of the Lord. And what did Jesus, when He saw the temple of God being defiled, He took out the whip and whipped people and kicked people out of the temple, because it's supposed to be a house of prayer, not of commerce, not of chit chat, not of getting together. It is a house of prayer and sacrifice. So I'll be doing a little video on I ordered a book on the old believers and some of the history of them. And a lot of it matches what happened to traditional Catholics, traditionalist Catholics, who simply wanted to maintain the faith, the rite, the practice, and the discipline they have received from their fathers. How can they be schismatic or not Catholic or not Christian for simply wanting to maintain the faith and the practice of their fathers? Um, and Before we get into this article, which is how to so it says old rite practices, preparing to come to an old rite church. One can say preparing to come into an old rite, real Roman rite Catholic church. The same, pretty much. A lot of the same ethos is there. Um, and unfortunately, with all the, anyways, I'll dwell on that some other time. Um, so just as very briefly, the old believers or old Russian Orthodox, simply it happened was because the patriarch decided he is the god of the liturgy, not the follower of tradition. And he reformed the ancient Byzantine rite as it was used by the Russians for millennia or centuries at least, because he looked at the Greeks. Oh, the Greeks did it differently, so let's adjust the way we have done it for 1,000 years. Who do you think you are to alter the ancient rites of the church? Again, by comparison to what happened to the Roman rite, what Patriarch Nikon did was minor by comparison, but very significant for the old believers. And first of all, he has no power to, he is not the Lord of the liturgy, but the preserver of tradition, the guardian of tradition, as all bishops should be. Anyways, the rite, they're split, and they were persecuted, martyred, executed, tortured for simply wanting to keep the faith and practice as it has always been in Russia. Martyred, burned, tortured. And then they lost all the bishops. They had no bishops. So at the moment, now you have like priestless old believers, but again, they have priestly old believers, so meaning they actually found bishops to ordain them. And they have, I think, 2 or 3 different organizations of priestly old believers. And then you have priestly old believers who are in full communion with the Russian Orthodox Church now, because they realized, hey, what we did was let's have let's call the old believers. What Benedict did was the extraordinary form of the Russian Orthodox Church. I'm just using that expression, or it's the 2 forms of the same rite. Yeah, okay, but at least in that case, it is pretty close to being true, not with the fake Roman Rite of Paul VI, complete adulteration of the Roman Rite, a Protestantization of the liturgy compared to the ancient Roman Rite. Complete. So unfortunately, you have these big groups of old believers who don't have priests. So they are basically kind of like certain traditional Catholics, so-called, who said, okay, there's no more hierarchies, there are no more priests, that's it, we're just going to have our old books, read the old rituals and matins and during the hours, and with a layman just presiding over services with no Eucharist, no confession, no nothing, because there's no more hierarchy. So there's these groups, which is like some so-called traditional Catholics who decide, well, okay, there's no more bishops or priests or nothing. We're just going to be home aloners. And then they have priestly orders who said, okay, no, we don't believe we're not sure about the validity of these bishops, so we're going to have, so they got their own bishops too. Anyways, they have their own valid, it's kind of like the sede vacantis, basically. Oh, we're not sure about these other bishops, but our bishops we're sure 100% they're valid. Okay, and then there's of course the Ecclesia Dei communities, in a sense, who are the old believers, who after the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church said, this is insanity. Like, why are we persecuting the so-called old believers who are maintaining the tradition of the Russian Orthodox Church, which before the deforms of Patriarch Nikon, we all practice. What's this insanity? So there's been reestablished a communion, and I believe this church in the Nativity in Pennsylvania is in full communion with the Russian Orthodox Church. So, but they are a traditional Russian Orthodox, meaning they have the old rite, the old rituals, the old practices, which apparently are significant, especially to them. So now let's get into the topic of the day, which is preparing yourself to enter an Old Rite service. And I'm talking this because it is the same feeling of people entering a traditional Latin Mass church. The fear, the apprehension, the confusion. What do I do? How am I going to behave? So it's kind of the same thing. All right, let's read the article. It's not a very long article, but it's kind of interesting. Hopefully, I don't forget some of the things I had in mind to mention. Well, let's get started. So, most Old Rite faithful, so the Traditionalists, Russians, try to arrive on time for the services. You got to arrive on time. So, I mean, even for the Novus Ordo people, they should arrive on time at the services. And the benches located in the Church of the Nativity are placed there because not because people are supposed to be sitting. They are placed there because the faithful usually arrive several minutes before the services begin, thus allowing them a place to sit before services commence. Because most of us, which includes myself, didn't know or don't know that pews, benches in churches, are in the history of Christianity a recent innovation or novelty or you know kind of a practice. All the ancient, like in the West, throughout the churches, throughout the world, benches didn't exist. People stood there, or they would sit on the floor, or bow on the floor, or standing. Most Eastern Orthodox, like the Byzantine version, would be standing virtually the whole services. Even in the Latin West, we'd be standing or kneeling. In the medieval churches up to the 15th century or so, there were no such thing as pews or benches. People in the West, it's not as a unique Russian Orthodox thing. No, even people in Europe, in the West, stood in the church or knelt when it was required to. Nobody sat down. The introduction of pews happened in the 15th century. So, the ultra rich, the nobility, we don't want to be standing all that time, and we want to reserve our place. So they had their own little pews made for them specifically. And after the deformation of the 16th century, when the sacrifice and the prayer were not really the focus of the church, going to church, but the sermon, to hear the word of God as I interpret it, as I read it and understand it. So the whole point of going to church was not to offer sacrifice. What sacrifice? We had the once for all sacrifice of the cross 2,000 years ago or 1,600 years ago. So there's no such thing as a sacrifice in the New Testament. So the whole point of going to church was sitting there and listening for an hour or two of the preacher preaching the gospel. So Protestants were the ones who really pushed the introduction of pews and people sitting there, because they wanted people sit there and listen to me, you're one pope of this church. So and then gradually Catholics started introducing it in England and America, and gradually it spread throughout the world. And even now, Oriental Orthodox have pews, Russian Orthodox have pews, Greek Orthodox have pews, but traditionally, there are no pews. People stood in church because you are standing before God. I'm not sitting leg on leg, cross-legged, putting my legs up in front of the Almighty God. You have to think about it that way so one understands the point. And I'm again wasting time dwelling on things which are not in the article. But anyways, let's continue. So they arrive on time for services. So, and it's okay. So also, it is still the practice of the Old Rite to read liturgically appointed homilies. Here we go. To read liturgically appointed homilies during matins and or vigils. So not the regular liturgy. So during matins, which is one of the midnight hours of the breviary of the prayers of the church. Same thing in the West, or vigils, and this brought to my mind a priest, a fraternity of St. Peter priest in a certain church, where he, in his homilies, in his sermons, on a daily basis, he would say, well, today in the priest's breviary, there are, I don't know, normally he compares them from the 1950 to the 1960 reforms. Like usually the older ones always have more. There's always these homilies, these homilies of the fathers, of St. Ambrose, of St. Benedict, of St. Augustine, written for that day. And he talks about, these are the various sermons, and he reads some of them. So it is, again, you can see the unity of the apostolic rites. Russian Orthodox up in the east and the Latins in the west, they have these liturgically appointed homilies for, in this case, matins or vigils, and it is in the Western Church, and again, traditionally, there are these homilies preserving the teaching of the fathers for the day. Just a little aside for you. During these readings of these homilies, the faithful sit and listen attentively. When the services do begin, the faithful stand with arms folded. So I believe it is like this or like that. So with arms folded. And of course, in the West, it is this way. And I believe you put the right thumb on top of the left for a symbol of the cross. Again, I could be wrong, but as I recall a long time ago, that's how we hold it. Not necessarily this way, but that way. Whatever. Anyways, so they stand with folded arms, with as little shifting of feet and body as necessary. So you can't be fidgeting all the time. And it's good. First of all, you're standing. So if you start as children doing this, it's normal. Your body just stands there. You don't move. You just, it's normal. I'm standing there, bowing, prostrating. There's a lot of prostrations, bowing down to the floor, your forehead on the floor in the Old Rite of the Russian Orthodox Church. So without necessary movement. Has always been the custom. It has always been the custom in the Old Rite to stand at any time of prayer with arms folded, much like the instructions given before the reading of the 6 Psalms. I don't know exactly what that means, but anyways. Proper attire is always expected in church. Proper attire is always expected in church. Nothing, can I say, annoys me more is to go to a church. Rarely, very rarely, it would happen in a traditional parish where the real Roman Rite is celebrated. More often, you will find it in the Reformed Roman Rite, the fake Roman Rite, the Rite of Paul VI churches, the so-called Novus Ordo, which is a word Paul VI himself used. It's the new order of the Mass, the Novus Ordo. Like they themselves coined the term conciliar church. It wasn't Archbishop Lefebvre. It was the people of Paul VI who called it the conciliar church. And you see that actually as well, unfortunately, in some Byzantine Rite Catholic parishes. I've noticed it once in a while. People come in, especially women, very inappropriately dressed, especially if it is summer. Shorts, skirts, like really short skirts. This, first of all, think of it as, and once in a while you'll find men with shorts. I know a certain person who went to a wedding in shorts where Mass is celebrated in shorts. Have some respect, man. Like, it's not, if not for God, at least for the bride and groom. If not for God, if you don't care about God, at least respect the human beings there you're supposed to help in their wedding. Anyways, so people like, a proper attire is expected in church. You're entering the house of God. You're supposed to be humble. You're supposed to be modest. You're supposed to be, there's an Arabic word called khushua, which means, I don't know what's the word in English. It's kind of like reverence, deep reverence. You can't go to to a house of sacrifice where God himself dwells in a miniskirt or in flip-flops, you know? I mean, even if you're wearing a t-shirt, at least have a nice looking one with some long pants, some shoes. At least, the least you can do. And especially for women who don't understand, when you wear like short shorts, when you wear mini skirts, when you have low cut tops, men will look. You are instigating, um, you're almost causing a sin because the man will, if not stare, at least have a little peek. And then your mind, instead for the men, the mind will no longer be focused on God, but every once in a while will look at this woman sitting in front of them with half naked legs. Uh, so you're causing a lack of prayer for the men. And that's why it was as well appropriate, and it's still practiced in the Eastern Orthodox churches, the Oriental Orthodox churches, and apparently some Byzantine Rite churches, and it is still actually, well, it is in the canons of the church, and it is still preserved in the 1917 Code of Canon Law, where it says men sit on one side of the church, women sit on the other side of the church. And I've mentioned that previously in my Latin Mass videos. It matches the custom of the temple, where you have the court of the men and the court of the women. And actually, if you read the old writings of the, say, apostolical constitutions and the like, it actually specifies where the virgins sit, meaning young women, where the widows sit, which is basically nuns, older nuns, and where the wives, the women sit, and who has a veil and who doesn't have a veil, and so forth. But the veiling was universal. It's told to us by the Jews did it. Again, it's a symbol of humility and submission to God. And like men, wouldn't be putting hats on, ball cap hats, or you take off your hat, you go in. You have some, and it's not a simple custom. I mean, St. Paul says, I don't know, some people might say this is custom, but for me, this is, what I've been taught, and this is what God has told me. So, anyways, it's just so the point is appropriate attire. You don't want to be distracting people from prayer by immodest attire. That's the whole point. Let's continue. It's a general custom in the Old Rite to have special church clothes. Wear your Sunday best. Remember that old expression from old TV shows? Oh, where they're wearing their Sunday best today, meaning they're all dressed up to go to church. Why? Because going to church or going to the holy mysteries, to the divine sacrifice, as the Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom calls the Holy Mass, the divine sacrifice, al-dhabiha al-ilahiyya in Arabic, where God is present. You are going to meet the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Are you going to go in flip-flops and shorts? Do you go meet a king or a prime minister or a premier in flip-flops and shorts and a little ripped t-shirt? No, you don't. Do you go to somebody's wedding in flip-flops or a mini skirt and a t-shirt? No, you don't. You dress up for their wedding, for human beings, let alone what are you going to do for God himself? How are you going to, people treat going to see God, to go entering into his house with less respect than they go to meet their new neighbors across the street. This is the insanity, the illogic modern man has. Yeah, you're going to see God. Put some clothes on. Put something even casual, but at least appropriate. At least nothing. Don't go with shorts and flip flops. Okay, And if you can dress in a suit or dress at least in a nice shirt or something appropriate. And women, don't wear really short skirts or skin tight jeans or skin tight pants where every curve and curvature is in the face of people, especially if you're in front of some man. What do you expect? Just have some self-respect and have some consideration for the man. Anyways, okay, let's continue now. Okay. While many other Orthodox confuse this custom, meaning having an appropriate clothing, simple and okay, let's actually hear. It is a general custom of the Old Rite to have special church clothes that are simple and appropriate. I say, well, some of them from you don't want to be Catholic Amish or going to an extreme. I'm not talking about like baggy like peasant clothes. No, just dress nicely, but don't overdo it. Dress appropriately, humbly, modestly. These are simple and appropriate. These clothes are simple and appropriate for prayer, which is accompanied with bows and prostrations, because again, they bow a lot and they prostrate a lot. Imagine if you're wearing a little short miniskirt when you're prostrating supposedly before God. While many other Orthodox confuse this custom with the desire to preserve ethnic vestige of the past. That's what they accuse traditional Catholics. Oh, you're just, it's a custom. It has no meaning what you guys are doing. You're dressed up nicely. You're bowing. You're kneeling. You're prostrating. You're, crossing yourself. You're standing. They're stupid customs. Oh, why are you dressed up like this? Why do you have veils on? Why are the men dressed up so nicely? Why? It's just some ethnic custom. The real reason, now the old ritualists are responding, the real reason people wear appropriate clothing, simple clothing, which allows them to bow down and to stand up, is to avoid a fashion show. And that's saying it nicely. If it was just a purely fashion show where everybody's dressed like they would go to a wedding feast, like the wedding feast of the Lamb, I wouldn't have too much of a problem. But again, you don't want to have a fashion show where everybody's looking, oh, look at her dress. Oh, look at this hat. Wow, it's pretty cool. Oh, look at this. Oh, look at these shoes. We're going to the house of God. We're not going to look at everybody's clothing. So yes, we don't want a fashion show. Plus, we don't want, which is worse than a fashion show, very inappropriate clothing, which will, instead of just looking at somebody's clothing and admiring them, instead of admiring the Holy of Holies or the thrice holy God in the tabernacle and in the sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, we're looking at everybody's clothing and their hairdos. Again, that's another reason for the veil. I don't want to be looking. Women have beautiful hair. You want to look at, oh, look how she's doing her hair. Oh, this is a nice cut. This is a short cut. Oh, look how she changed her hairstyle. Do I really want to do that? Or do even women want to be in church looking at other women's hairdos? That's why a little veil will cut this long story short. And you don't have to be after Mass, after the Holy Sacrifice, after the Divine Liturgy. You go outside, take off your veil, and everybody can admire your nice hairdo. You don't have to do it in church. All right? So you don't want to be avoid a fashion show in the church. To maintain clean clothes, unsullied by cigarettes and smoke and other uses associated with the other worldly places, often frequented by all of us in this secular world, and to ensure comfortable, modest dress for prayer. So you don't want to be wearing your clothes everywhere to the bar and to the club, and let's take the same clothes to the church. There's a real good point to that. Females of all ages must, there is no option, must and actually it is said up to the 1917 code, it always says women must cover their heads with a scarf or while in church. So, um, and this comes from ancient Hebrew custom. Even the custom of the pagans, where they covered as a sign of not completely covered like the Arabians. You can see actually in the Holy Scriptures where the prostitutes are the ones who are completely covered with only maybe their eyes showing in the Old Testament. They were the prostitutes. It wasn't for humility. Um, but the covering. Look at the Virgin Mary and all her icons. Always has her veil. I have in one of a fraternity of St. Peter Parish, which I frequent. The local artist drew a painting of the Holy Family with the veil of Mary kind of dangling down, not on top of her head, which up to this day bothers me quite a bit because it's in contradiction with every single icon depicting the Virgin or the statue or her appearance at Fatima, Lourdes, wherever. She always has her veil. Of course, I understand the point of the painting is their home, Saint Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. So Mary in her house with her husband and her son wouldn't be necessarily covering her head. But again, her son is God, so we don't know actually what happened in the home. But this icon, this painting, is placed in the church, so it really does bother me not seeing her veil on as she has been depicted for 2,000 years. So her veil is kind of slightly down, as if it's coming off her head. Anyways, so yeah, it is ancient custom. It is mentioned by Saint Paul specifically, not only as a form of modesty for women and for men to remove, not to have head coverings for men, and as a protection against the angels, whatever that means. I don't want to dwell on that right now. And that is specifically talking about in church. So they must cover their heads with a scarf while in church. Such items as hats and napkin-like little napkin-like coverings there are considered to be inappropriate and insufficient as head coverings for females. Entering an old Rite church. Well, entering a traditional Roman Rite church. Entering any ancient church of the Apostolic Rites, who hopefully still maintain some of their customs. Many people unfamiliar, this is actually a line which is so true. Many people unfamiliar with the Old Rite, which is the rite of their grandfather. Well, for the Latin West, it is the rite of their fathers or even grandfathers. Like it's the and their great grand, like for their ancestors. Now they're afraid. And for the Russian Orthodox, it is the rite which was celebrated by all Russian Orthodox until Patriarch Nikon decided he's the god of the liturgy and he can alter it as he wishes and persecute and murder Russian believers who simply wanted to maintain the ancient rite which they have received from their holy ancestors. Many people unfamiliar with the Old Rite are fearful of coming to an Old Rite church. This is true. I mean, I have relatives of my own who are like, what do we do? They're afraid to walk into a traditional Rite church. They're just they don't get it. They're afraid. Like, what are you afraid of? It's a church. It's the house of God. It's a Catholic church. Why are you afraid? Because they instinctively know to enter an Old Rite church, an Apostolic Rite church, you have to behave differently. You can't be as casual. You can't just do whatever you want to do. You're going to have to be reverent. I think it's instinctive without being told. But again, it's unfamiliar. Thank you, Paul VI, the destroyer of the Roman Rite. So this is apparently true for other Orthodox, Byzantine Rite, Russian Orthodox, or Greek Orthodox are afraid of entering. They are fearful of coming to an Old Rite church. The Old Rite is not, so now he's talking about, of course, the Russian Old Rite, the Russian Orthodox Church. The Old Rite is not a different rite of the Russian Orthodox Church, but instead a variation of the very rite familiar to those who know the rite practiced by the Russian Orthodox Church after the deforms of Patriarch Nikon. They don't say deforms, they say reforms, but I say deforms. Because he deformed the traditional Byzantine usage of the Russian Orthodox Church because he wanted to. Because he thought he, Patriarch Nikon, knew better than all the previous patriarchs of the Russian Orthodox Church. Because he decided, well, we've been doing things wrong for 1,000 years. What? We've been doing our sign of the cross wrong for 1,000 years. What? We've been prostrating church wrong for 1,000 years. What the hell? What? We're saying too many prayers here. Let's reduce them. What? But all in all, from what I understand, his reforms are like insignificant compared to the total destruction of the Roman Rite by Paul VI and his henchman Annibale Bonini. And don't tell me it's two forms of the same Roman Rite. That's what Benedict said. One can say of the old believers, right, the real traditional Russian Rite and the current Russian Orthodox Rite are two forms of the same Byzantine Rite, same Russian Orthodox Rite. One can say that because the differences are not hugely significant. Reduction of certain prayers, reduction of prostrations, reductions of changing the way you do the sign of the cross, all significant, but nothing compared to what was done, the total massacre of the Roman Rite by Paul VI, who is probably not having a good time, and he's definitely not a saint. If he is a saint, then God had tremendous mercy on him, but he should not be honored in any way, shape, or form by any Catholic. Just because Jorge Bergoglio called him saint doesn't make him saint because he destroyed the Roman Rite. He might have repented at the end of his life. He may be in heaven, but he deserves zero honors. All right, let's continue. So after the deforms of Patriarch Nikon. There are, however, certain practices of the Russian Orthodox Church which are no longer familiar to the faithful who use the Reformed rites, but still followed in Old Rite parishes. Several of these practices may be confusing to other Orthodox faithful without some explanation. So he's going to give some explanation. So a lot of practices, even for Catholics, those who attend the Novus Ordo, the fake Roman Rite, a lot of practices of the Catholic Church have become unfamiliar to them. Like a lot of even, a basic practice is like communion, Holy Communion. Nobody ever in history touched the holy divine body and blood of Christ. Nobody. And I have a whole video on this, dwelling on it, of the ancient writings, that the body of Christ is more precious than than powdered gold, than gold dust. Do you think, okay, we're going to put some gold dust on our hands? No way. Or they talk about the canon of St. Hippolytus and the fake Roman Rite, which is total lie, which I show. Even in that, the homily or the writings of St. Hippolytus, I think it was St. Hippolytus, yeah, I'm pretty sure, talks about only the priests gave the priests and high priests, meaning the bishops, would distribute the body of Christ, and the deacons would administer, listen to that word, the mystery of faith, mysterium fidei, which is said in the canon of the Mass. After the priest consecrates the blood, he says, mysterium fidei, the mystery of faith. And you can see now the connection where the deacons distributed the mystery of faith, the blood of Christ, and the priests and bishops distributed the body of Christ. Of course, there's no deacons, the priests would distribute both. No lay people grabbing the Eucharist to themselves. None of that stuff. So a lot of practices have become unfamiliar to those who attend the fake Roman Rite of Paul VI. And not only practices, but practices imbue belief. And if you are practicing a watered down expression of the Catholic faith, you are going to have a watered down Catholic faith, which will make you prey to every error and heresy and schism. All right, let's continue here. So there are some practices which are become unfamiliar to other Orthodox, Byzantine Rite Russian Orthodox Church parishes, faithful. All right. First of all, Old Rite services always begin and end with what is known as the entrance and departure bows, whatever it is in Russian. These bows, or more correctly, these prayers are. So like it's a prayer and a bow, a prayer and a bow. So he gives them. Again, I've never attended any Old Believers parish, so I'm not really familiar, but actually they do have a YouTube channel. You can watch it probably. God be merciful. God be merciful. And actually they were, again, most Old Believers still celebrate their liturgy in Slavonic, ancient liturgical language of the Russian Orthodox Church. But this parish in Pennsylvania, apparently it was almost dying out. People were not coming to the old Slavonic liturgies, and so they started using the English language, and apparently it helped them. But again, in their translations, it is accurate. When I talk about the Latin Mass, it's Latin. Well, Latin is very familiar with all the Western languages because we're all based pretty much on Latin, especially the Romance languages, Spanish, Italian, very, very close to Latin. Even English, a lot of it is very Latinistic, if that's a word. It's very easy. Same, we're using the Latin alphabet, but Old Slavonic compared to English, you've got a completely different alphabet. It's harder for people to get familiar with it. But I guess if your kids, I'm not in a favor of any alteration, even in liturgical language, because liturgical language preserves the faith. Like a dead language preserves the faith unaltered. A living language changes over time, and your understanding will alter in the change of the language. So anyways, very few parishes do actually do it in their like English, but they do, but they revived their parish, but they maintained the rite undefiled. That's why most Catholics think, well, we only have the Mass in English. It's the same thing, but it's just a Mass in English. No, it is not. It is a completely altered and deformed rite. It is not the Roman rite. It is completely altered and deformed. If All they did was allow, on certain occasions, or maybe one Mass on a Sunday, an exact, accurate, precise translation of the Latin text, of the unaltered liturgy of the church, I would have zero, close to zero objection to it. As long as it is accurate, it is faithful, it is not gender inclusive and all this stuff which alters the meaning of the text. If it is exact and precise, of the same rite, of the same liturgy, then maintain the same practices. And yeah, you can say, oh, this is just the Mass. I'm going to the English Mass today. I'm going to the Fresh Mass. It's the same Mass. That is, but unfortunately, that's not what happened. Your English Mass, your French Mass, your Italian Mass is the fake Roman Rite, the Rite of Paul VI. It is not the Roman Rite. It's not apostolic and it's not Catholic. Catholic meaning it didn't come, it does not span the Catholic, the universal time frame. It doesn't come to us from the apostles. 1,000 years they didn't celebrate it. They only celebrated it from 1969, and the deform started even from the 1950s to a certain extent. Okay, so let's continue. And it's not the Rite of Trent either. Trent simply purified the ancient Roman Rite for the Roman Church and allowed any liturgy older than 200 years. Unlike what Jorge Bergoglio, also known as Pope Francis, Trent banned new liturgies, new fabrications. Jorge Bergoglio, aka Francis the Bishop Justin White of Rome, wants to ban the ancient in favor of the fabrication. Exact opposite of anything Catholic. So anyways, let's go with the 3 prostrations, the bows before and after the liturgy. So, and I'm going to do a little kind of a comparison. It says, God be merciful to us sinners. And then they bow. Thou hast created us. Lord, have mercy on us. Bow. We have sinned immeasurably. Lord, forgive us. Bow. Remember the prayers at the foot of the altar before entering the church. Before technically the Mass begins. The priest bows down and prays actually even before that, the sprinkling with holy water, the asperges me domine hysopo. Cleanse, wash me with hyssop, and so I'll be cleansed and become whiter than snow. So, and it says, Ostende nobis Domini misericordiam tuum, O Lord, show us thy mercy. And so there is a lot of familiarity with this. And when the priest does actually say the confiteor, the confession of faith, he's bowing, like really deep bow. He says, I confess to Almighty God, to Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, to Michael the Archangel, that I have sinned through my fault, and so it's the confession of sins. So a lot of this is familiar to a Latin, right, a traditional Roman rite parish, a lot, because it's all apostolic. We have to show humility. We have to show contrition for sins. We have to recognize that we are sinners, that we are approaching the most holy of holies, the awe-inspiring, the awesome mysteries. Anyways, it continues. Then it is truly meet up to Shine, Shine, New Jerusalem during Paschal time season. There is a prostration. And we actually, I think, once a year, there's the priest, the prostrate, I think Good Friday, where the priests are totally prostrate on their faces in front of the altar. And then there's Glory be to the Father, bow. What do we do in the traditional Roman rite? Gloria Patri et Filio, they all bow. And then, now and forever, per omnia saecula saeculorum. Again, there's a bow. Lord have mercy, Kyrie eleison. Most of the time, the parish, the people are kneeling. So basically bowing down on their knees, asking God for mercy. Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison. Lord bless. There's a bow. Reminds me as well at the end of the liturgy of the Roman Rite, where the priest bows, kisses the altar, and then turns around and blesses the kneeling, bowing congregation. And the dismissal. May Christ our true God. And the continuation, there's a prostration. And actually, I've noticed in the Coptic Orthodox rites, there is a lot of bowing and prostrating and kneeling. So these prayers are all also follow the dismissal at the end of the services before the faithful complete the services. When prostrations are made, Old Rite Orthodox use a small cloth pad known as a whatever produshko, I can't even say it, which is placed on the floor. So when they bow down, they prostrate, they put this little piece of cloth on the floor. Reminds us well on the Good Friday, I think the priests, when they bow down, do the total prostration. They put a cloth or a little cushion in front of them, so they're on it, and at the ordination of priests as well. The reason for this is that the hands used to make the sign of the cross in an external expression of dogmatic belief in the two natures of Christ and the unity of the Holy Trinity should not be soiled in prayer. So your hands, which are used to do the sign of the cross, should not be soiled, especially if the floor is dirty. You don't want to be sticking your hand on the floor. So they use a little cloth to put their hands while they're bowing down. And just as an aside, one of the reasons for the break with the Patriarch Nikon's reforms is that he decided, you know what, we've been doing the sign of the cross wrong for 1,000 years here. What? Oh yeah, we've been doing it wrong. Now we're going to do the sign of the cross with the three fingers like this and do the sign of the cross. And the old believers, or the Russian Orthodox faithful and priests and bishops and patriarchs for 1,000 years or more, have been doing the sign of the cross. How? You can see it in icons. They have the three fingers there, and that's how it is. The two natures of Christ, and I think this way it spells the name of Jesus Christ or something like that. But anyways, you'll see that icon, a lot of icons like this. So the two natures of Christ, humanity and divinity. And some say this is the Trinity, some say it's not. But the point of these two fingers is for them, when you're doing the sign of the cross, you're only touching with the two fingers, and you do it this way. And the reason is Christ was the one on the cross. It was not the Holy Trinity which was on the cross. It was Christ. For us, it might be kind of, yeah, of course, the Trinity was not on the cross, but, it was Jesus Christ. But for them, this was kind of a sticking point. You're telling me the Trinity is on the cross? This is how their mind worked? No, for 1,000 years or more, we've been doing it this way. You can see it in all the icons. And we're touching this because the divinity and the humanity, Jesus Christ, is the one who was on the cross. And as an aside, I've noticed, how the Byzantine, the Oriental Orthodox cross themselves like the Catholics, left to right. Oriental Orthodox. Eastern Orthodox, they'll cross themselves right to left. Don't know why. But anyways, I think it's a guess. If you watch a liturgy or you go to a Eastern Catholic rite, when the priest turns around and he blesses the people, he blesses them right to left. But imagine if you're the person, the congregant, you're facing the priest. So the priest is actually blessing you right to left, but you're facing him and you're mirroring his cross. So if he's doing right to left and I'm mirroring him, so I'm going to go down, I'm going to go left to right. This way I'm mirroring the cross of the priest. And that is my total guess of why the sign of the cross is different for the Byzantines. Don't know, but I think it's a pretty smart guess, I think. So the sign of the cross is a dogmatic, external expression of dogmatic faith, the two natures of Christ, and the unity of the Trinity, which is the three fingers down here, should not be sold in prayer. All right, let's continue. Conduct during, oh, come on. What's wrong with this thing? Conduct during prayer services. Prostrations are made at times and at prayers that are often different than for other Orthodox accustomed to the diminution of prostrations, the reduction. So Patriarch Nikon said, yeah, too many prostrations, reduce them. Too many prayers, reduce them. Because as you can see, the beginning prayers, no other Orthodox don't say them. He imitated the Greek custom instead of maintaining the ancient Russian custom. So the diminution, the reduction of the prostrations made by and after Patriarch Nikon. A study needs to be made to determine what exactly is meant, determine exactly what the canons of the church meant when they prohibited prayer on bended knees at certain times. And that, I think, is a Council of Nicaea or something. It says on Sundays, don't pray on bended knees, but I guess weekdays you can. But again, what do you mean by that? Because every rite of the church, Oriental Orthodox or Coptic Orthodox, Byzantine, Catholic, Latin West, they all bend the knee. And that's actually, this is kind of a discipline, maybe on bended knees at certain times. But that's, it's not a big deal. For example, the surface books used in the Old Rite and used by all Russian Orthodox prior to the reforms of Patriarch Nikon, especially direct prostrations at the kissing of the gospel at the Sunday Matins, or at it is truly meet at the end of the liturgy, and even at the end of the Shine, Shine, New Jerusalem, all during Paschal season. So even during Paschal season, they were, in the old Russian usage, they were told to kneel, to prostrate themselves. So while one might argue the propriety of making these prostrations, it must be understood the service books during directing these prostrations are hundreds of years old and predate the schism. I would say Patriarch Nikon is the one who became a schismatic against the Russian Orthodox Church, not the old believers who simply wanted to maintain the ancient rite in the Russian Orthodox by many decades, if not centuries. Thus, these prostrations are not old believer oddities, but the semi-ancient, if not ancient practice of the Russian Orthodox Church. And lots of prostrations in all the ancient churches. They have been reduced in the Latin West, unfortunately, but they are still done. While on the subject of the sign of the cross, which we talked about, and the bows, and in the West, as I recall, again, for most Latin Rite Catholics or Roman Rite Catholics, the priest will cross himself with an open hand like that. Instead of doing this or instead of doing this, they'll do. And as I've read, these are the symbolized, again, the whole point is Jesus Christ, is the 5 wounds of Christ: his hands, his legs, and his heart, his pierced heart. So the 5 wounds of Christ, you got the 5 fingers as a sign of the cross. So while the subject of the the sign of the cross and bows, it is appropriate to mention that these external expressions of the inner faith, so kneeling, standing, prostrating, signs of the cross, various prayers, bodily gestures, hands like this, bowing, closing eyes, whatever. These are external expressions of the inner faith. It's not just empty gestures. It expresses what is believed. And if you do not express what is supposedly believed, you will lose that belief. Anyways, constitute part of what might be best described as the love of uniformity and order that is prevalent among the old ritualists. So people say, oh, this is just being stickler for ritual. No, it's the love of uniformity and order, because God is the God of order. He's not the God of chaos. He's not the God of confusion. He created the universe in order. The love of uniformity and order is to love God. To love chaos is to love the devil, to imitate at least the God of disorder, being the devil. The prefatory section of the Psalter mentioned earlier, where is this? Specifies exactly when the sign of the cross and accompanying bows to the waist or prostrations are to be made. So it exactly tells you when to do the sign of the cross, when to bow, when to kneel. And as an aside, in the traditional Roman Rite, the real Roman Rite, they have 33 signs of the cross during the liturgy of the Mass. 33 for each year of Jesus Christ on earth. Of course, that has been slaughtered in the fake Roman Rite. Thus, all the worshiping faithful will be found making the sign of the cross at exactly the same time and places. In the Old Rite, one does not make the sign of the cross or prostrations or kneel when one feels moved to do so. I'm moved by the Spirit, so no, to do so, but at the appropriate times in unison. Like in the Roman Rite, when you say, una voce dicens, like together with one voice, we say Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus. Not I'm going to say Sanctus when I want and you say Sanctus when you want. This may cause some confusion to other Orthodox, since the sign of the cross is not necessarily made at each invocation of the Trinity or entreaty to Christ, while at other places, such as at the more honorable than the and this is a hymn to the Virgin Mary, most honorable than the cherubim, more higher than the seraphim, or something, how it goes. And what do they do for this hymn to the Virgin? Is the sign of the cross and accompanying bow are always made by all the faithful. Likewise, we're almost done. Even motion is discouraged during certain parts of the service. Enters or exit, or even fixing of candles is not expected during readings at the beginning of prayers, Heaven the King through Come Let Us Worship, or during the reading of the 6 Psalms in Matins, or during the reading or recitation of the Creed, which stands straight in the Creed. We're not going to be running around lighting candles, going in and out of the church, or during the reading of the Gospel. And I think in the Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom says, stand with fear, or let us be attentive, let us stand with fear and be attentive, or something like that, for the Gospel. Even apart from these, and actually in the Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom itself says, bow down. And I noticed even in the Byzantine Rite, it says bow down and nobody's bowing down. Kneel and nobody's kneeling. Well, it says it right there in the liturgy. Even apart from these more solemn parts of the service, Old Rite Orthodox do not wander, or Old Rite Catholics do not wander around the church in order to venerate icons or light candles. Shouldn't be wandering all over the place. Above all the icons and candles, and you got to pay attention to the most important thing, most important prayer of all, which is the sacrifice, the liturgy. After that, you can light your candles. While the warden or altar boys may fill the oil lamps or replace candles, the other faithful who enter the church after the beginning of services do not wander through the church, but find a place and stand and enter with as little disruption as possible. If one entering late would like to light a candle, have a candle lit, they may ask the warden altar boy to place the candle at an icon in front of the church. Once one has found a place to stand, it is general practice to stay at that place unless one must leave the church because of sickness or some other need. Otherwise, it is not common to walk in and out of church. Because actually, you watch some YouTube channels of for example, like Orthodox churches in Jordan. Um, you'll see people walking, the priest is doing his mass, and people are walking in and out and talking to the bishop, and some faith people are just standing, but people are just, I guess this is kind of a more loose, oh yeah, the priest is doing his thing, we're going to walk, we're going to chat a bit, we're going to pay attention to, go to the icons. So this is what they're talking about here. Okay, finally, we're finished. A couple of comments should be made on the mysteries, the mysterium, where the mysteries, the sacraments, and actually in the Latin Mass, the Roman Rite, it'll use the word sacrament or mystery in the Latin language. In the some of thank you for celebrating the mysteries, which is the same use as the Easterners. Uh, Finally, a couple of comments should be made on the mysteries most commonly practiced by Orthodox Christians. Confession is a holy mystery. Confession is a holy mystery. And it is not appropriate to be squeezed in during celebration of other services. So this practice of having confession during Mass, I guess it's okay if it is no other possibility. It is nice to have it before the liturgy starts. But I guess limiting of time of priests or a big long number of confessors force one to, especially in traditional parishes, to have confessionals line during the liturgy. But anyways, for them, it shouldn't be squeezed among other things. In fact, confession in the Old Rite practice is a service itself, with the reading of prayers, psalms, a sermon for those making confession, and review of sins recited by them. Those who practice, and this is a good advice for Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the bishop dressed in white residing in the Diocese of Rome, the Bishop of Rome, and for those who promote the heretical novelties of the modern age. Let's listen to the old believers, to the old ritualists, to the traditional Russians, to actually the voice of the apostles, as it has always been taught by the Church Universal. Those who partake of communion are expected to make a confession within a reasonable time beforehand. They must not, not an option here, not should not, no, they must not partake without confession if they have committed grave sins or disregarded the rules of the church in regards to the fast, attendance at church on Sundays and feasts, or especially if they have borne a grudge against their neighbor. They must attend divine services the before the liturgy at which they will partake of the Eucharist, and they must prepare themselves by reading pre-communion canon and prayers. So to receive Holy Communion, you prepare yourself by praying specifically pre-communion prayers. So Catholics, traditional Rite Catholics as well too, have a lot of pre-communion prayers, which we can actually say before we even go into Mass, to get our mind and set on what we are going to be receiving. Communion is given to the laity in the form of 3 spoonfuls of the precious and most honorable body and blood of Christ. Most precious and honorable body, blood of Christ. Most precious and honorable body and blood of Christ. And they're giving it in a spoon. So the people lift up their mouths. There's usually a cloth underneath. And the body is in the blood. And they take a spoon and it's dropped into the mouth. I guess they give them 3. And the Byzantine Rite in the West, the Melkites will take the bread, dip it in the blood, and give it to the people. The Ukrainians and other Byzantine will use a spoon. The body is already in the blood, and will give one. But I guess for the Traditionalist Russians, they used to do 3, which again symbolizes the Trinity. Uh, so, and that's it. Again, nobody's grabbing the Eucharist by their hands. They don't have extraordinary ministers of the Eucharist, Eucharistic ministers running around grabbing the body of Christ. No, 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 no. Only the priest would be touching the body, and only the priest would be touching the sacred vessel. Read the Old Testament. Only priests were touching the sacred vessels. The people didn't dare touch these sacred vessels. That's why in the traditional rite, altar boys and servers don't touch the sacred vessels. And if they have to, they wear gloves, take a cloth and they never touch it with their bare hands. Only the hands of the priest or the deacon would dare touch the sacred vessels. Anyways, so, and in my opinion, the traditional rite, the traditional Roman rite, should restore the communion of the blood. Blood, not saying it's deficient, not to say that, oh, just eating the Eucharistic bread is deficient. You're not getting the whole Christ. No. Because we can see actually in early writings of the fathers that sometimes, a lot of times, people just received the body, didn't receive the blood, especially in times of persecution. So they stored or preserved the body to receive it. But Jesus himself said, receive and eat and drink. Don't just eat, but eat and drink my body and my blood. And this has been the custom of the Church of the Latin West and throughout the world forever. But in the Latin West, to fight a heresy that said that if you don't have the blood, you do not get the full Christ, the Church said, okay, fine then. No, this is totally false. This is heretical. You get the whole Christ in either the bread or the blood, the wine, which looks like wine, which is the blood of Christ, which looks like bread, but actually it's the body of Christ. But you get the full Christ in either or, body, blood, soul, and divinity. And that's why the distribution of the Holy Blood was gradually eliminated in the West. I think up to the late Middle Ages, the 15th century, people were still receiving the Holy Body and Blood. But gradually it became less and less. That should not be it. I've seen like an ancient chalice where it's a chalice and it's surrounded by like a paten, and it has where the host would sit, and then the priest would take the host and dip it in the blood and give it to the faithful. So yeah, in my opinion, in keeping with apostolic tradition and custom of the Universal Church, the traditionalist orders need to restore communion of the blood and the body. And traditional Catholics should rejoice and not reject it as innovation and novelty. It's not, it's actually tradition. And we should restore the rood screens, which symbolizes the veil of the temple, which again would restore a greater uniformity of worship with the Eastern Catholics, Orthodox or Oriental Orthodox, with their iconostases and curtains. We would have our rood screen, which we always did. Anyways, so I hope you enjoyed the little video here about how to prepare yourself to enter an old ritual or old believer or old rite church, which would mean any traditional Roman Catholic can understand, or any Catholic of the Roman Rite. This is how you enter into a traditional Roman Rite parish. Same story. Prepare yourself, be humble, be aware of your sins, dress modestly, arrive ready to worship God. Don't, just worship as how your fathers and grandfathers and great grandfathers did, and in a rite and a way of praying and a way of ritual and a way of discipline that has come to us through the centuries, through the apostles, martyrs, and saints. Not made up by a committee of experts in 1969. All right, that's it. That's all. Hope you enjoyed this video. And if you want to like it, like it. If you want to subscribe to this channel, subscribe. And if you want to be really nice to me and actually share my videos on social media, that'll be fantastic. All right, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.